Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. One of the issues that I have been puzzling about for a long time is whether the United States is the greatest democracy on the planet. Whether it always has been, whether it always will be, probably not now that Trump's going to be has been elected. But I have been wondering about what does construct a democracy, and why is it that American exceptionalism seems to be the the cry that you hear from a lot of Americans, the clarion call to greatness, if you like, because so many Americans see themselves as the first democracy, if you like. That's the way it often appears to me, even though I'm sure many of them do understand there have been other democracies. And because I live in Australia, we are a parliamentary democracy, part of the Westminster system, which inherited from the UK, but we also have a Senate, which we inherited from the United States. So when we were formed later than the US, obviously. But are we a democracy? Are there many other democracies around the world? Yeah, well, there are. There are heaps of democracies. Do they run efficiently and effectively? Some do, some don't. Are they fair and equitable? No, none of them are probably fair and equitable. But then what makes a great democracy? And this experiment they often refer to as being this experiment they're having in the United States around the republic and their sense of democracy is an interesting discussion, because they are not the best by far. And they have lived and survived on this myth that they are for decades, You know, one of the things I think that we don't often realise about the United States was that when there was a war raging in Europe, and they chose to do nothing about it, not to help anybody, not to defend other countries, even though they were just across the pond from them, and that they showed no allegiance to anyone really apart from themselves, because frankly they were selfish bastards. They only entered the war once they were attacked by the Japanese. If that hadn't have happened, they would have been quite happy to have seen Europe burned to the ground and the UK to be taken over by the Germans. So I've often seen Americans as selfish, egocentric, self-centred, narcissistic. And when I think of Donald Trump, I think he exemplifies to some extent everything that is about the United States. They are insular. They don't look beyond their own country. In fact, there are people in the United States who wouldn't even know where Australia was on a map. And they would know nothing, generally nothing, about Australia and other countries. And when they've been asked to choose certain countries on the map, they've failed miserably, because they're so uninformed, because they just see themselves as being exclusive. And, you know, because America does have a large industrial base, they do have a massive military, which is only rivaled now by China. And because they have all this power and this influence, they've been able to influence the world through NATO and through other AUKUS and other agreements around the world. And because of their military power, they do appear to be powerful. But none of that makes them a good democracy. As was just seen by the election of Donald Trump, they are a failed democracy, as we've seen by the terrible, disgraceful electoral college system that they have, how unfair their democracy is, how they gerrymander electorates so that they can pick and choose the people that they want to vote for them, is just crazy. But that's the United States. But that's their sense of exceptionalism. So, and you know, when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about where does Australia sit? Well, for what it's worth, Australia was the first nation in the world to grant women dual rights the right to vote, the right to stand for parliament, and so forth. Enfranchisement promised progress, opportunity, and self-determination. Australia did that. At that particular point in history, were we the greatest nation on earth? Well, we haven't been, because it wasn't until 1966 that we broke the nexus and allowed and recognised Indigenous people and allowed them to vote. So we were not the greatest nation on earth. The United States has not been the greatest nation on earth either. So where does democracy fit into all of this? So the term democracy comes from the ancient Greek or political and philosophical thought of the city-state of Athens during classical antiquity. And it comes from demos, which is about people, and from kratos, which is force or right. So the people have the right to be able to select the people that they want to represent them in parliament or in power. So that's where democracy came from. And we know that in times of ancient Greece in particular, there were democratic elements that were taking place, maybe not as we would have seen them today, but certainly people were elected for certain positions, and there was a sense of democracy, even though it was far from it. I don't think slaves could vote, for example, and slaves could not have become members of the Senate as it was back then. So I guess there were definitely restrictions about who could vote, but they had this basic concept. And democracy has been around for a long, long time. So I was interested in this particular idea. So so there was a survey, which was from the Pew Research Centre, which looked at most believe the US is no longer a good model of democracy. So my thinking started with, well, it didn't start with all of this, but it was informed by this particular report, which I found interesting to say the least. And so most believe the US is no longer a good model of democracy. So the top here, the dark green, is a good example of other countries to follow. The other one used to be a good example, but has not been in recent years. I don't know what length of time that recent years has never been a good example for other countries to follow. Now, as we peruse down through this, there's a number of things that sort of stick out for me. Number one, Australia is, in terms of, is a good example for other countries to follow. We're 11%. We actually, on the whole, don't think all that much of Americans, for all the reasons that I've mentioned. I think that a lot of people think that. And 64%, though, used to be a good example, but isn't any longer. And 24% on the Australian statistics say that has never been a good example for other countries to follow. New Zealand rates them even worse. So those two countries down in the southern hemisphere say you crap the United States. But interestingly enough, Canada was 14%, so they weren't all that far behind in terms of is a good example. 69% used to be, and 14%. Now I wonder, I don't know how recent the survey was necessarily, but I wonder whether some of those statistics, in terms of the way that Trump has been attacked in Canada, whether any of that has actually changed. I would suspect that it actually has. But the medium view, just with this one down here, is 17% say that they were a good example. 57% say that no longer is the case, and 23% basically say that they've never been a good example of democracy. And in the United States itself was 1972 and 8%. So 72% now saying that they used to be, but are no longer. So I guess my point is that that there is a growing sense that the United States is losing influence and losing power, and to some extent, this is why Trump has been able to create the interest, I guess, that he has. And part of the reason for that is that there has been an amount of discontent. The United States are losing their influence. In fact, Trump is more determined than anyone to make sure that influence, in terms of being the policeman for the world, is diminishing and will diminish under him. except he will prop up places like Israel, heaven forbid, and do what he can to destroy Iran, which is probably a good thing. But nevertheless, the United States' influence around the world is diminishing. And part of that is probably because China has become more influential, and you can't insist and have these trade wars with China. They're just going to send you into a state of recession. So a lot is happening in the world which is changing all of this. So let me know what you think. Do you actually believe that this sense of exceptionalism is justified, whether the United States is an exceptional country or not, or whether you believe that it never has been, but it's a myth that they've sold us about their power, which is military power and industrial power. And there's a big debate at the moment happening in the US with Vivek Swamy and Elon Musk in relation to how people that should come into the country on certain visas based on their professionalism and the way they could help the US economy by the specialisations that they have, which is a fair argument, but it discounts all those people that just think if you're brown, if you come from India, skin colour skin, shouldn't be here. So, and there are lots of issues in the United States that, and we're not. It isn't like we don't have those issues in Australia. We do. We are a racist country. I've said that many times before. So I'm not excluding us from the debate. But if we just look at the United States, you're stuffed. You're a pit, a deep, dark pit, waiting to be filled in. And there are heaps of places around you that are anxious to fill it in. And it'll be your own demise. And it will be sad when it happens, because not all people in the US think the same. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, and please remember to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell for further notifications. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.